Vicky Hall, and I am the chair of the Staff Parish Relations Committee. I wanted to thank each of you for taking the time to renew your child and youth protection training online. You can download a copy of the training handout and the covenant, which is what you will complete, answer the questions, sign, date, and return to the church office at the first chance you have. A central tenet of the Christian faith is the inherent value and worth of children, youth, and adults. Shores United Methodist Church is committed to doing what it can to protect youth and children who participate in the life of this congregation. We are called to offer both hospitality and protections to children and youth. The fact that you are renewing your training shows that you too are committed to this effort. This year, 2019, the Florida Conference made major revisions in the policy required for local churches to carry out. The entire child and youth protection policy is also available on the church website if you want to read or refer to that document. I will mention most of the major changes in this presentation. According to the guidelines of the Florida United Methodist Church, this annual training must include 8 things: the definition and recognition of child abuse, current child protection issues, the church's policy and procedures on child abuse and the reasons for having them, abuse reporting responsibilities and procedures, the need to maintain a positive classroom environment, including appropriate discipline and behavior, appropriate behaviors for teachers and leaders at children and youth events, definition of interpersonal boundaries, and the meaning and importance of confidentiality. So let's start at the beginning. The definition and recognition of child abuse. For our purposes today, the 4 different kinds of child abuses are physical abuse, the violent, non-accidental contact, which results in injury. This could include hitting, biting, shaking, and results in bruises, fractures, cuts, and burns. Sexual abuse, which is any form of sexual activity with a child, whether at home, at church, or any other setting. Emotional abuse, which is the pattern of intentional conduct which crushes a child or youth's spirit or attacks their self-worth through rejection, threats, terrorizing, isolating, or belittling. And neglect, which is the failure to provide for a child or youth's basic needs or failure to protect a child or youth from harm. Neglect is a new category from the previous policy. In all types of abuse, the abuser may be an adult, an adolescent, or even another child. So let's look at the current child protection issues and policies. Children and youth are the least able to protect themselves in our society and are particularly vulnerable to abuse and neglect. Child abuse happens daily across every socioeconomic strata, religion, and place. Anyone who wishes to volunteer to work with our children and youth must have been affiliated with our church for 6 months. They do not need to be a church member. However, we must be able to verify that they have been actively with us for 6 months. One exception is a transferee from a Florida United Methodist congregation, and we can get verification of all of their screening and paperwork from that church. We are trying to keep unfamiliar people away from our kids. We have several categories of adults who work with our children and youth. Let's cover those in detail. They are paid staff person, screened adult, and adult volunteer. A paid staff person is a church employee. A screened adult is someone who has been interviewed by the Staff Parish Relations Committee, had a criminal background check, and provided personal references that have been checked. An adult volunteer is someone who may not have had a background check, an interview, nor had references checked. They can only work in a classroom with a paid staff person or screened adult. We also have youth helpers. These are youth between ages 12 and 18. They can assist with activities, however, they themselves must be supervised by an adult. The people in all of these categories, including youth helpers, must participate in this child and youth protection policy training annually. Everyone who is paid by the church, volunteers with our children and youth, or has keys to these buildings must participate in annual training. There are no exceptions. The rule about key holders is new and is monitored by the trustees, which means if you continue to work with our children and youth, or you have keys to these buildings which could give you access to children and youth, you will need to renew your training before 1 year from today. And don't worry, we'll remind you. I'm going to use the word screened a lot. For the purposes of protecting our children and youth, screened equals an interview, 3 personal references, and a criminal background check. Anyone who volunteers more than 4 hours per month must be screened. All of our church employees have been screened. Anyone who volunteers less than 4 hours per month, or anyone who volunteers 3 or fewer times per year to assist with our children and youth, does not have to be screened, but must be supervised or accompanied at all times by a screened adult when children are present. You don't need to think about which category you fit into. We rely on directors or leaders in our programs to tell us who their volunteers are, how often they volunteer, and then we proceed from there. Now, the church's policy and procedures on child abuse and the reasons for having them. The social principles of the United Methodist Church state, children must be protected from economic, physical, sexual exploitation, and abuse. God calls us to make our churches safe places, protecting children and other vulnerable persons from abuse. The pastor and the Staff Parish Relations Committee are charged with the responsibility of developing, implementing, and evaluating the process for recruiting, screening, selecting, training, and supervising every member of our church family who interacts with our children and youth while they are here on our campus or at a church-sponsored event. New this year is that any outside group, such as Scouts, that uses our campus to serve children and youth must also agree to follow our church's guidelines. The trustees are responsible to monitor this also. We are required to update background checks every 3 years. It used to be 5. This is a change from the past, and we will need to budget accordingly. All children and youth activities must have a written record of the names of new participants, supervisors, and volunteers present. There must be sign-in, sign-out procedures for all programs, especially for infants through grade 6. Youth can sign themselves in and out if an adult is not picking them up. Unauthorized adults cannot pick up children. The permission form for all of our programs is standard, and you have a copy with the handout. This form gives parents the opportunity to list those who can and those who cannot pick up their children. Be familiar with the permission forms for the children you are supervising. All of these records must be kept in the church office for 3 years past the event. This can be the sign-in book or the attendance charts that hang on the wall. Do not discard those attendance charts. Instead, be sure the dates and the year are clearly marked, the teachers' names are on them, and turn them into the church office. If you have questions, talk to the person who is in charge of the program. Children and toddlers through grade 6 should be escorted to the bathrooms when there's no bathroom adjoining the classroom. The adults should wait in the gathering room while a child is in a bathroom in the sanctuary. The adult should wait near the hallway in the Christian Education building if they are accompanying a child to the bathroom. All right, moving on to abuse reporting responsibilities and procedures. Florida statute states that any person who knows or has reasonable cause or suspicion that a child is abused, abandoned, or neglected by a parent, legal custodian, caregiver, or any other person responsible for a child's welfare shall report such knowledge or suspicion. This includes when the suspected abuse occurs at home, school, church, or any other place. As a church employee or church volunteer, you are considered to be a mandatory reporter. This means if you fail to report abuse or suspected abuse, you are violating the law. If you observe abuse, first try to get the abuser away from the child to prevent further harm. Then you call the abuse hotline. The number is posted in every classroom of both buildings and in the nursery, and it's in your handout. If the abuse is observed by, disclosed to, or suspected by a paid staff person, a screened adult, or a volunteer of this church, the observer must report the incident immediately to the pastor. If the pastor is not available, then contact the district superintendent. After that, a call should be made to the Child Abuse Reporting Hotline. All of these numbers are also posted. If there is a problem and the authorities are called, it is important to let the authorities do the investigation. That is not our responsibility, and we should cooperate with the authorities and do not interfere with their work. So about the need to maintain a positive classroom environment, including appropriate discipline and behavior. Let's start with some general guidelines for the supervision of children. Following these will help with appropriate discipline and behaviors on our campus, as well as offering protections to children, adults, and the church. All screened adults supervising children and youth must be 3 years older than the age group they are supervising. All activities involving children and youth must be supervised by at least one screened adult. Do not leave a group of children alone. Every room set aside for children and youth must have a door or window, or door or wall with a window, half doors or open doors. Leave the blinds open. Windows tend to remove the opportunities for secrecy and isolation, conditions every child abuser seeks. We have an open door policy, which means parents, volunteers, or staff of the church are permitted to visit and observe the classrooms anytime. About appropriate behaviors for teachers and leaders at church, at child and youth events. We have specific ratios for students in every program. For Sunday school, the crib toddler aged children to grade 2, at least 2 adults, non-related family members, one screened, must be present at all times. Plus, a designated screened adult will periodically check in and walk through the room, not just peek in the window. For grades 3 through 6, at least one screened adult must be present. 2 are preferred. Plus, a designated screened adult will periodically walk through the classroom. For grades 7 through 12, our youth, at least one screened adult for all classroom activities, plus the designated screened adult will periodically check each classroom. Now for larger groups, such as Vacation Bible School and Wednesday night, the ratios change a bit according to the age of the children. For crib toddler children, kind of our preschoolers, one screened adult for every 5 children, plus a designated screened adult will periodically check each classroom. Again, non-related adults. For kindergarten through grade 2, at least one screened adult for every 7 children, plus a designated screened adult will periodically check each classroom, non-related adults. For grades 3 through 6, at least one screened adult for every 8 children, plus a designated screened adult will periodically check each classroom. For grades 7 through 12, our youth, at least one screened adult must be present at all times, plus a designated screened adult will periodically check each classroom. We do have a second adult volunteer in the youth room on Wednesday nights, stemming from the days when we had more than 15 to 20 kids in there, which is too much for one person to supervise. Let's talk about classroom discipline and behavior. Any parent, teacher, or grandparent will agree that children learn best when they are relaxed, safe, and able to actively participate in the activity or lesson. For the most part, children crave order and knowing the expectations, which keeps everyone safe and happy. Most of our programs have posted schedules and rules for acceptable behavior. It is necessary to review these rules with the children periodically, especially when it appears they've forgotten them. Noise is an issue in our buildings. These walls are not soundproof, and neither are partitions. Loud games, screaming, running, yelling, horsing around, or disregarding acceptable behavior for a church setting can lead to accidents and disrupt classes for others. Both of our buildings are God's house, and we have an obligation to teach children appropriate behavior to use when in a church. Be careful how you speak to children, especially the vocabulary you use and your tone of voice. Also, be aware of children bothering other children, either physically or verbally. Bullying is a hot-button issue, whether it is being perpetuated by an adult or another child, and should not be tolerated or ignored. Sometimes it is necessary to take a child discreetly aside for counseling or redirection about their behavior. This should never be done by just one adult, and is not done in front of other children if you can avoid it. Always have another adult present for that conversation, mostly as a witness, not necessarily to participate in the conversation. Anytime we are dealing with kids, no matter how hard we try, accidents happen, whether inside or outside on the playground. There is a first aid kit in the Christian Education Building kitchen on the bottom shelf under the kitchen window that rolls up and down. There is a first aid kit atop the AED at the usher station in the sanctuary. Program directors and leaders have incident report forms available for your use. If there is a problem, an accident, an accusation, anything which you believe could possibly become an issue later, please complete that form and be sure to give it to the person who is in charge of your program. It is always a good idea for someone, preferably the person in charge of the program, to mention this incident or any conversation of correction to the parent so that they are aware of the behavior and our response to it. You can also give them a copy of the incident report. The bottom line is, this is a church. It is possible to have fun, learn something new, without jeopardizing or disturbing another classroom or another child. Let's talk about interpersonal boundaries. It is important for you to protect yourself, others, and our church from accusations of misconduct. We know we have huggers, and hugging children is okay. However, never touch a child on the part of their body that a bathing suit covers. Do not push, hit, or grab a child unless you are protecting them from harm. The examples of a child running out in front of a car or falling from playground equipment come to mind. What you need to remember is whether you are a paid employee, screened adult, or adult volunteer, it is never a good idea to be left alone with a child or a group of children. Confidentiality and, the meaning and importance of confidentiality. Because this is a church, what happens here stays here. I know it may be tempting to go home and tell your spouse or your friends about the children and the youth we serve here, whether it's the good stuff or the not so good stuff. If you have a concern about a child or a program, it is appropriate to talk to the person who is in charge of that program, the pastor, or perhaps another adult who works with you. Any information you hear or overhear here stays here. Some of us are more private than others, and we don't want our personal business shared on the street, and the same is true for our children and their families. So if you have concerns, please use discretion and follow these guidelines. Related to confidentiality, there are new rules about social media, photographs, and online safety. We are now required to have the parents actually indicate in writing if we can or cannot photograph their child, and whether we can or cannot post those photos on the church's social media pages. Some do not, to remember. Do not post photos of children and youth at church activities on your own personal page. You can share the church's posting on your page. Do not send a friend request to any children or youth at our church who have social media sites. You can accept a friend request from them. Do not send a text message or email to one of our children or youth unless you copy the parent or send the message to all the children and youth in the program. Parents will be asked to give permission for texts and emails to their child and indicate whether they want to receive a copy of every text and every email sent to their child by a church employee or church volunteer. The registration permission form that we are now using has a back to it, with the photo and electronic communication permission questions on the back. Do not intentionally share the passwords to our church Wi-Fi with children or youth. This is not a new rule. Both of our buildings have wireless capabilities. If you need wireless for a lesson you are teaching, talk to the program coordinator. In case of emergencies, most of us carry cell phones. However, if not, there is a telephone in the kitchen of the Christian Education Building that can be used. Speaking of the Christian Education Building, that building has its own set of guidelines for use that are clearly posted. If you are in that building or working in that building, please make yourself aware of those guidelines and do what you can to follow them at the end of the day or the end of the night. If you are in this building after the office closes and need a phone, there is a phone in the Weaver Room off of the lobby or narthex. One thing about cell phones, if you have one, please try not to use it while you are supervising children. I know many of us are on call for other family members. If you need to make a call, take a call, or carry on a text conversation, get coverage for your duties while you're on the phone. Remember that person who walks through? That would be your first request. There are specific guidelines for transporting children or youth, including overnight trips, cars, hotels, and off-campus missions. Some new guidelines include prohibiting our children and youth from staying in private residences, such as Airbnbs and VRBOs, and leaving a list of children or youth on a trip and copies of the parent permission forms in the church office before leaving town. If you are involved in any of that, please look at the entire policy well in advance of your trip. You can also ask Pastor Carolyn, the program leader or director, or me if you have questions. Just because you're not in charge doesn't mean you're not responsible for following required guidelines. We are all responsible. So if I look back at the 8 areas this training was to cover, I think I hit them all. If you have any questions, my phone number is at the bottom of the training handout, and I am also listed in the church directory. You can call, text, or email me, just not when you're supervising kids. So please complete the covenant, sign, and note the date you watch this video. Thank you again for renewing today, and thank you for all that you do and will be doing for our children and youth. God bless you.